Constitution. Well, yeah, as it was explained to me from the very beginning, the writer and the copyright holder, and my first copyrights were recording on a tape recorder and sending it to the Library of Congress and having them send it back in a sealed envelope, and you never open that envelope, and then you own the copyright. Well, then it got more sophisticated, and we had them officially copywritten with, sheet music and the whole works. So yes, I was the copywriter of all my songs, and
because you wrote your songs
I wrote
on your
all
own.
the songs by myself.
So the very first question I had concerned copyrights. I wanted to see the copyrights. I went to the United States Copyright Office website, and I was indeed able to find all of Melanie's copyrights there, still intact. It turns out that ever since Melanie first began writing songs, her mother Polly insisted that Melanie protect her rights. As the songwriter, as well as the copyright owner for her biggest hit songs, such as Brand New Key, Lay Down Candles in the Rain, What Have They Done to My Song, The Saddest Thing, which are just a few of her hits. Per existing copyright law, those copyrights should be held in place for 75 years following Melanie's passing. Shortly after arriving to Tennessee in 2019, I embarked on a tour with Melanie and Bo.
Oh yeah!
Stops primarily in the eastern part of the United States. And on the long rides from Tennessee up to the location of the show, I enjoyed hearing Melanie share numerous stories. And that's really how I started to understand how important and how mighty of a company Peter and Melanie's Neighborhood Records must have been. These are scenes from a music video I shot at one of Melanie's first tour stops in the summer of 2019. It's important to be aware that Melanie's music career was based on Peter's promise to protect her the entire time. Otherwise, Melanie had big ambitions in other areas of art. In music, when any issue arose, Peter said, "Tell them to see me instead of upset you, okay?" And this worked because Melanie was ironclad. She told me that she was very upfront on any copyright infringement. She expected Peter was pushing through to get problems solved. But the two were never enmeshed in any systems. They were only together alone in the industry. And so it was really only after she and I spoke in the car rides during that tour that she realized how stopped Peter was ever since Neighborhood Records had closed. I felt kinship with Peter from where I stood. I think he was on the outside. And I think that's how their trouble with YouTube and with Buddah Records and with Sony and the missing writers share from ASCAP wore them both down. There was no one to turn to, so they always turned to touring and to Melanie's shows. And that's why I told her I can only see handling these problems as a human rights abuse. And that's why I said I felt like we could together work to promote and to educate artists in music about the 27th human right. Because so many major businesses are aware of these problems. Major corporations using Melanie's copywritten works, using the recordings that were paid for by both Peter and Melanie, and there was no avenue to get these problems solved ethically. There seemed to be no basis of decency for the artists in music. Peter was a refugee who escaped the Ukraine as a stowaway. Dealing with New York pressures and strains were second nature to him. And of course, Melanie was his treasure to keep. So Peter really had ambition as well as drive and perseverance. Peter brought Melanie to Buddah Records. He got her signed there on a short-term contract. Peter and Melanie tied the knot at the very end of 1968. Then immediately, he had her on a plane flying to Paris. Melanie said Peter was very eager to present her to Europe, to the United Kingdom, and other places far abroad. Peter made a lifelong binding promise to Melanie at that time, which was that he was going to respect her art and respect her boundaries and ensure that she never lost control of her art. Was this cup from the Olympia Theater with Gilbert Bécaud and Melanie at the bottom. This is amazing.
Yes, this was, I was presented to the French public by Bruno Cocatrix, and he was the great presenter in Paris, and he presented Edith Piaf, you know, and he presented Gilbert Bécaud, who was considered, I guess, he was the Frank Sinatra of France, or all of Europe. They called him Mr. 40,000 volts or something. He was a very high energy guy, you know, so, and he actually was introducing me, and he brought me to Bruno Cocatrix, and I performed for 40 days and 40 nights, second on the bill.
That's amazing.
That's why my name is big there.
In 1971, Melanie and Peter together launched what may be the most successful independent record label. It rivaled the major labels of its day. Their music company's first album, Gather Me, sold in the millions of copies, and track number 4, Brand New Key, was a #1 song across the charts. Peter directed international sales from their office in New York City, located at 1 Central Park West, right next to Central Park. The company owned the entire floor. I took a gamble that Melanie could publicly reopen Neighborhood Records. We talked about doing that. Melanie was full of ambition to make it right for herself again in music. The tour brought us to Pennsylvania, across the state of New York, to North Carolina, back to Tennessee. It brought us to Bethel, New York on the 50th anniversary of Woodstock. While we were there, I reached out to the executive director of the Bethel Center of Arts, which is located on the original Woodstock site. Though the executive director was very kind, she was unable to work things out for Melanie to be able to perform on stage that night. We were all so disappointed. Personally, I hated seeing Melanie treated that way on the 50th anniversary of Woodstock. I really felt she had earned her place in history and that she should have been welcomed on the stage.
Critics laugh and make it less than the extraordinary wonder when humanity awakens. Oh, but the music will remember.
I really do believe in Melanie's music, and so I wanted to help her. When all was said and done, I went to upstate New York to retrieve the tapes that Peter had stored away in 1974. These tapes comprised the studio archives, the tapes from which the master recordings for the official album releases were taken from. They included remarkable alternate versions of many of Melanie's best performances. As well, lost shows from the 1970s were also there, stacked in boxes and crates. Storage was the issue both in New York and in Tennessee. I placed the audio reels in clean boxes, free from infestation. On the journey from New York to Oregon, I began to work with a graphic designer over the phone to develop my concept for my company's logo, which of course included a music note and incorporated the imagery from a pair of earrings that I had purchased for my mom in the 90s on the Oregon coast. Now, there were considerable challenges Melanie dealt with when it came to controlling her music as the decades went by. The first thing she told me about was the use of her music on YouTube. Incredibly, Melanie's song, Brand New Key, which she wrote and she performed, is the song for the most viral video on YouTube of all time. And that's per Guinness World Book of Records.
Well, I was gonna open my own YouTube channel, and I thought, why not? You know, everybody else has my YouTubes up there, so I thought, and I have new YouTubes and things I want my fans to be able to see.
Yeah.
So I started posting my own songs that I wrote on my YouTube channel, and YouTube said there's a question. You can't put these up because there's a copyright violation.
Wow.
A copyright violation. I'm the copyright holder. How can I be in violation of myself? So
Now, were they talking about the performance itself?
they were talking. No, they said I could they would allow me to let it be up, but they would not let it be monetized, and then they would take it right off, and I would not be allowed to have a YouTube
I see.
channel of any of the songs that I had ever written.
Wow.
So that's pretty serious. So you know, we're towing the line, and I'm not making any money doing this. They are.
This might have been the very start of Peter and Melanie understanding that they were not really in control of their work at all.
Every day there's a new YouTube up on either my performance or someone from another country, or some new artist makes a YouTube and puts it up. And no one's ever consulted me. I'm dead. I think they think I'm dead.
Wow.
But I'm not.
Wow. Well, you're being treated like you're dead.
Oh, I'm being treated like I'm dead, yes.
Wow.
And, you know, and pretty soon it'll be true. And I'd really like to get it right before that happens.
Melanie also described constant attacks she was experiencing from her original recording deal back between 1968 and the start of 1971.
I won an Emmy for, yes, that was so well deserved. Really, the hardest 5 months I ever spent working on something. I declined the invitation to go to the Emmys, but I don't know. It was just a moment in my life where I just didn't want to. I didn't think I'd win in any way, shape, or form, you know. So, wow. And I thought, I just don't want to schmooze. You know, a schmoozing person, and I didn't want to do that. So, I watched Artie Ripp. I watched him receive my Emmy for the writing of the lyric to Beauty and the Beast, the TV show. And my heart broke. What am I doing? Why didn't I go there and get my Emmy? And but afterward, I was in LA, and I said, "Hi, I'm here to pick up my Emmy." And he said, "Oh, yeah, well, I have, it's not here, it's somewhere else, I'll get it to you." And this went on for months and months.
As well, a very energetic band which Melanie found a great deal of spiritual kinship with, the Hilltop Hoods from Australia, used about 60 or 90 seconds of her recording from 1969 or 1970, thereabouts. Their use of her recording embedded into their music a song called The People in the Front Row, sold in the millions. Tragically, Melanie never saw any of those earnings at all. pretty much right after they signed their first publishing deal following the closing of Neighborhood Records. Back in 1975, Melanie dealt with dishonesty by the company that she was dealing with. And it would have been incredibly time-consuming and expensive for Peter and Melanie to deal with that issue at that time.
When I was about 9 months pregnant, I was in a grocery store, and I looked up at the cereal box, and it said, "Look what they've done to my oatmeal, Ma." Right?
Oh.
The cereal box. And I thought, that sounds like my song. Look what they've done to my... And sure enough, like, I heard the commercial.
Right.
Look what they've done to my oatmeal, you know. And I was appalled. I mean, I couldn't believe that they could just do that. And it was written on the box. And the publisher never mentioned it was happening. And in fact, deceived us.
Because if it came out 3 weeks after you signed a contract back in 1974, they must have made those boxes 6 months.
They had to at least have
Right.
had this in the works.
Right.
And they actually told me, the publisher told me, there was no interest in my music.
So he was trying to convince you that your music had no value.
Yes.
So you would sign a contract where you received less money.
Right.
And you didn't know that What Have You Done to My Song, Ma had been used to sell oatmeal.
No, not at all. Yeah, I mean, it's a very ironic story, isn't it? That the one song that has probably been used more than Brand New Key is "Look What They've Done to My Song, Ma." And the very line says, "Don't use this in an oatmeal commercial. Don't use this song in a car commercial. Please don't use this song in a soap commercial."
As far as the artist Melanie herself was concerned, she owned all of her music. Her songs were written by herself. She owned the composition copyrights, which had never been sold by her ever, and she never dealt once in any sales of her very expensive and time-consuming recordings. Despite these facts, Melanie wasn't earning anything on her compositions nor on her recordings from the 1960s throughout the 1970s. So in reality, a long list of prestigious companies were receiving payment rather than Melanie. Which led to the question, how was this possible?
And Peter was the person who handled a lot of the business and was a wonderful father and husband, and we were married for 47 years, and I had no reason to ever think about that again, because first of all, I was told you can't sell your copyright. You know, that's not even a possibility. And
so you weren't even thinking you needed to protect that
no, but
look for it in a contract?
Not at all. But copyright was something that I owned until Peter passed away, and then I found out other things, that people were collecting money on that copyright.
Wow, amazing.
So, yes, so that's how it's been. And I keep writing, you know, I'm going to keep writing. I write almost every day. And that's what I'll do until my time here is over. And but I would like to make it right, because it's very wrong what happened.
So one of the first things that Melanie asked me to do was to contact the ASCAP headquarters in New York City on her behalf. She had been given an email address for one of the vice presidents from a friend, but she hadn't yet spoken to him. So that began a series of email conversations and phone calls with Melanie in the room where we discussed the issue. He supplied me as well as Melanie with documentation which did not bear a notarization in a location on the paperwork where it was required to have a notarization. That piece of documentation was the primary document ASCAP was using to withhold paying Melanie. And in fact, they were using this letter of redirection to sweep aside any requests that Melanie had about payments not going to her. So every quarter she would receive a list of tens of thousands of dollars going to other people. Additionally, the ASCAP dashboard did not list Melanie as a performer. Melanie performed her hit songs. If you work in music, you can understand how big of an error this would be, that ASCAP had her as a songwriter with all of her writer's share profits going to other parties based on a letter of redirection that did not have a notarization on her name, and additionally did not have her listed as the performer of all of these songs.
I was fortunate and unfortunate in that I immediately had hit records. I didn't have that step of slowly playing and paying my dues, and I sang songs, and I married a producer, and they were hits. I had hit records, so I was in the fortunate position of being able to call the shots. I felt ASCAP was my organization for writers. I didn't think they represented entities that would try to hurt a writer. So I trusted that I was with this organization and they were going to protect me.
I looked for documentation kept on file with the Secretary of State of New York concerning neighborhood records. I found the original entry as a corporation filed through Peter's house staff. However, due to no action taken to keep the corporation active since the middle of the 1970s, we would be required to pay some fees. The idea of investing anything into the old Neighborhood Records Music Company was very far-fetched, with low income ahead always. In February of 2020, I had a promise from the vice president at ASCAP that his legal team was looking into the missing notarization on the letter of redirection. As well, I asked the vice president to inquire about the lack of response to Peter's earlier requests to remove ASCAP from Melanie's corporate dealings in any way. There was no word. In fact, no one ever got back to Melanie or I regarding this. However, sometime in 2020, and after more than a decade, ASCAP did grant Melanie her requested departure. I hired a private investigator. What I received from him was too rich to be ignored. He ran into a document on a legal website. It was from the 12th Court of Appeals for New York. In it, the court confirmed both Peter and Melanie fully released from any obligations to her first and only lasting artist contract with Buddah Records, also known as Kamaripa. The court found that Melanie's contract had been well fulfilled. That was back in 1975. I started to work with a company I found in New Jersey. It's called Sonycraft A2DX Lab. Its owner, Kevin, was closely interested in Melanie as a fellow artist from New Jersey, where Melanie spent her teenage years. And Kevin loved to hear the original sound that was now coming off those 1970s tapes. It was a miracle to hear something so pure and good based on the age of the tapes and the storage conditions. At that point, I reached out to a music company in Nashville, Tennessee. They loved Melanie as well as Bo, but the complex situation connected to Melanie and ASCAP and the other companies was too much to invest anything in. However, he handed over a phone number for a senior Sony executive who held control over Sony's legacy department. We spoke together, Melanie and I, to this very important person at Sony Legacy, and within 24 hours of pointing out that no one was streaming Melanie's music at that time due to the fact that it was a copyright infringement, within 24 hours, all of that music was now available on streaming. So that gives you some idea of how under the radar Melanie was before we got started. The complex situation with so many companies involved in one artist's work, which the artist herself disputed, needed to be fixed in order to move forward. So I advised Melanie to write cease and desist letters in order to make her viewpoint clear to everyone, and to send these out to all the companies dealing in Melanie's work, despite the fact that she argued this publicly on her social media. I paid for several letters to be notarized. I also paid for these letters to be sent in certified mail. So they were sent off in the summer of 2020. No response was ever given to these, to my knowledge. I began talking to people I knew about Neighborhood Records. An opportunity seeker from Missouri pitched in substantially to put together a series of releases using Melanie's recordings from Neighborhood Records. The first person I paid with this investment was Melanie, the royalty for the upcoming release from the tapes. I placed ads in Goldmine magazine, and I spoke to the editor. I was able to secure an interview of Melanie. Goldmine magazine published an article telling the story of Neighborhood Records. It was great. It was the first time that story had been told with real clarity in a published work. A spot was reserved at the prestigious performance hall, The Egg, located in Albany, which is the state capital of New York. It was going to be a release event for Melanie's work. And all of the tapes were transported by me to New Jersey for cleaning and for transfer. An information booth was secured at the Beach Life Festival in Southern California. The booth was open for the entirety of the 3-day festival. It was a sold-out event with 10,000 people attending and with numerous high-profile acts performing. Suddenly and strangely, our investment was cut short at 1/10 of the agreement. What happened there is still a mystery to us to this day. But within 6 months, a roller skating rabbit, which played a recording of Melanie's composition, Brand New Key, was for sale at Walmart. I reached out to the legal department at Gemmy Corporation in Texas. They said they had acquired permission to use Melanie's composition from Sony. Melanie was then put directly in contact with Gemmy Corporation, and Melanie herself provided all the information about what was happening. Naturally, Melanie wanted payment. However, no action was taken, and it was also confirmed by me that several thousands of dollars had been paid to Sony by Gemmy Corporation for this use. Meanwhile, Melanie suffered. The pandemic was still ongoing. Her delayed medical treatment continued to be an issue. I looked at everything again. Only one notary public was used, attached to Melanie's signature on all the paperwork. I was able to connect with him on the phone. He vividly remembered Peter Shakarik as well as his daughter. After all, Peter was the husband of Melanie, and he was quite a fan of Melanie in his youth. He wanted to meet her and asked that I relay a hello to her. He said he remembered Peter coming into the shop. He needed 3 documents notarized. At least that's the number of documents he could recall off the top of his head. Then he had mailed everything off for Peter to Europe. I talked to Melanie about this. Around that time, Melanie and Peter had gone through the ringer trying to put together a contract with EMI. This contract had never been finished. Naturally, hearing this statement from the notary public was a tremendous relief. It was then I decided to require Melanie to issue another batch of letters. And this was done. The letters were sent. Yet again, there was no response, and the use of Melanie's compositions, as well as her performances and her recordings, continued. I next compiled binders which were intended for the Secretary of State anywhere companies dealt with Melanie's work. I received an encouraging response from the state of Tennessee. My information was forwarded to the district attorney. From there, however, it was required that an attorney be hired. Sadly, there were no funds for that. Through all of the years I spent working with Melanie, I always saw her as a stalwart character in history who had somehow survived America's ever-changing culture. And for that, I felt a true sense of friendship and duty to her as a fellow artist to see a positive outcome in this mess. The happy ending I was hoping for was a full return to Melanie's control of all of her music files, as well as a list of all of the income that had been diverted away from her, so that this could all be collected by her and her family.
I finally gave in and paid $5,000 to an accounting firm in Tennessee. It was supposed to be one of the best in all of the United States.
What did we get from this? We first received a list of a number of songs which Melanie had never heard of. I then had a very long conversation about two companies in New York City which obviously didn't have anything to do with our question. And finally, and worst of all, I received a brand new version of the letter of redirection, the same one that I had received from ASCAP back in 2019. It now bore a notarization. However, the notarization it had was the same person who said that he had never met Melanie, not once.
The next cliffhanger occurred when I ran a search for the neighborhood records filing I had found back in 2020. There was nothing to be seen in the database for the Secretary of State in New York. So I paid $500 to an experienced attorney based out of Florida. When the attorney got back to me, she told me simply that the neighborhood records filing didn't exist. One morning, Melanie and I sat down to take a breather. I asked her if she still had a phone number for Sandor Frankel. He was the attorney who won one of the lawsuits against Buddah Records. He now happened to be a very well-connected man in New York as one of the key advisors concerning the Helmsley estate, which, amongst incredible endowments for charitable actions around the world, also owns the Empire State Building, the Flatiron Building, and the Helmsley Building in New York City. Mr. Frankel was very cheerful about talking to Melanie for the first time in years. In the main, he stated blatantly that Peter was a liar, to which Melanie replied, with a little bit of shock in her voice, "No, he wasn't." Sandor confessed it was just something he had heard being stated. Then he seemed to soften, and he relayed how he really felt. He said that by today's standards, he would not be able to win the case in Peter and Melanie's favor anymore, the way he did back in those days when neighborhood records was the biggest thing in independent music. He won the case because he did everything exactly by the book in a legal fashion. Yet since that time, he had been ashamed of his lack of knowledge of the music industry due to pressure he received from outside parties. At that point, what we had in our favor was Melanie's public statements about the abuse she and Peter had suffered, statements she had made the entire time, since all the way back in 1975, when her composition of What Have They Done to My Song, Ma appeared in cereal campaigns and other advertisements. We also had the statement by the notary public who had never actually met Melanie. We had the record of email conversations concerning the lack of a notarization for close to a decade on the single piece of paper that was touted as the reason why they could no longer trust Melanie nor hear her complaints at all. We had the two conflicting pieces of documentation from ASCAP where their original paperwork showed no notarization on Melanie's name, and yet the second piece of paperwork, which had come through the prestigious Tennessee music accounting firm, now bore a fake notarization. And of course, and possibly more important than all the rest, Melanie's copyrights are still on file with the United States Copyright Office. In fact, I made a trip to the United States Copyright Office to see them myself. Nothing was being paid to Melanie for her song compositions. As well, nothing was paid to her as the recording superstar. nor for the use of her historic Neighborhood Records recordings, or for the other recordings before and after Neighborhood Records, with the exception of very, very recent material. Requests by Melanie and members of her family, as well as many friends, to resolve these matters were never once responded to with any real answer. Things just drifted.
Or they were the people who got your songs to someone who would further your song. You know, make it go
What was
somewhere.
your understanding would occur if, let's say, a studio wanted to use Brand New Key in a movie?
That they would use my song in a movie, and that I would be, this was what they were offering, you know, whatever that fee was, and this was usually good news, you know. That is confusing, actually, because I'm not sure. I would be sometimes told, like, because when they used Brand New Key in the porn movie,
Right.
I
Did they
forgot
use Brand New Key in a porn movie?
Oh God, yes.
Really?
Well, it was not. What was that movie
Boogie
called?
Nights.
Oh, Boogie Nights?
Boogie Nights, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was pretty much about a porn. It was about a porn movie, so there was quite a bit of porn in it, and yeah. So I was. I had thought that there was. I was told that there would be no explicit sex during the use of that song. Well, they lied. You know, there was very explicit, and it was during my song, and I was privy to watching the two stars together. The girl had roller skates on, and it was.
Was
I
the
could see
sequence that
why.
you were contacted, we want to use your song in Boogie Nights and we want to license it from you?
No, the publisher.
The publisher was contacted. The publisher asked you.
Yeah, and I was again assured, because it was about a porn star. We wanted to be sure it wasn't going to be
Right.
sleazy.
Right.
But
Shortly after Peter's death in 2010, ASCAP distributed paperwork to Melanie so as to explain why they no longer paid anything at all. This paperwork portrayed a chain of events where Melanie's writer's share was directed to Peter to collect her earnings. ASCAP sent Melanie a similar piece of documentation where Peter directed his earnings to a company called Quartet Music. Quartet Music was later acquired by Bug Music. This fact was confirmed by documentation which my private detective was able to find. We also were able to verify that BMG acquired Bug Music. Through detailed conversation with the ASCAP vice president, including my visiting with him in person in New York City, I was able to let Melanie know BMG was factually receiving all her ASCAP royalty payments from Buddah Records and Neighborhood Records days.
there, no, you would think that
Right.
the organization that was supposed to be protecting writers would have informed me that this is happening or was going to happen
Right,
in
exactly.
convoluted legalese, you know.
Amazing.
If
If you can't read it and clearly understand it, you know, there's something wrong right there.
Yeah.
You should be able to just read it yourself.
Right.
Not have to hire a lawyer or spend $100,000
Right.
so that you can protect your ownership of your copyright.
Right.
It is your human right now.
Melanie did not have legal representation at all. She just wanted to be left alone. She was up against major industry connections and corporate plays without Peter by her side. To start to unravel the confusing situation, I stopped by BMG at their California headquarters, located inside a beautiful skyscraper in sunny Los Angeles. Miraculously, I was allowed to speak with the head of the legal department there without any appointment. That man earnestly expressed concern for Melanie's state of affairs. And he dropped what I felt was a real bomb when he said this was the deal ASCAP presented to BMG. He had already heard from ASCAP about the request. He had looked at the paperwork and he said it was all in order. As the years rolled forward into the pandemic, we lost touch with BMG. Remember that BMG acquired Quartet through their having acquired Bug Music. Bug Music was the second company after Peter allegedly assigned everything to Quartet Music. Quartet Music somehow had been acquired by Bug Music. By chance, I met two different individuals who had worked at Bug Music. The second person was the most exciting due to the fact that I was walking down the street in McMinnville, Oregon, when a pair of musicians asked to talk to me about my book concerning human rights in the music industry. They brought me inside a wine tasting event. Seated at the piano was a man with various details about music. He was just a friend they thought I should talk to. But when we began to speak, he filled me in on the nature of Bug Music.
Well, Stevie Wonder got me my break. Yeah, I was working with someone with a backup singer, and she was my partner. And she knew Stevie. She had heard me, and she brought me down to meet Stevie. I was only 19 years old, and Stevie got me a gig producing for Island Records. Because he heard my music and said, "Hey, I heard your music. You can do this." I'm just a kid from Santa Barbara. I didn't know anything, but I just said yes to everything. And within a week, I had a producing job at Island. And they hired me back 10 years later. But in the meantime, I started working for labels after doing a lot of studio work. I worked for Bug Music, and I worked for all the big publishers, the professional managers. Professional managers are like what used to be song players.
Yeah.
So play songs with artists and get them to put it on. So that was my gig for another 8 years. And then
Did Bug Music acquire Quartet Music?
they acquired a lot of stuff. Dan Borgois and Fred Borgois were brothers. Dan Borgois and Fred Borgois, they're both brothers.
Okay.
And what had happened was Dan was partners with Del Shannon.
Okay.
Del Shannon said, "Dan, I'm broke." You're Del Shannon. Can you be broke? He said, "I don't know. I don't have any more money coming in." And he said, "What about Europe?" And he said, "What about Europe?" He said, "You don't think you have royalties in Europe?" He said, "Do I?"
Right.
So he said, "Look, Dan, if you can handle that," he said, "I'll tell you what we'll do. Whatever I can find in Europe, I won't charge you. We'll split it."
Right.
And Del says, "Hey, all of a sudden they're millionaires. You got $1 million. What are we going to do with this money?" Well, yeah, he didn't even know we had it. He was broke. Unfortunately, Del committed suicide a couple of years later. But Del, what are we going to do with it? Let's start a publishing company and tell everyone, do not sell your publishing. And let's administrate all the music. And then that way, the writers and songwriters won't have to sell the publishing. Instead of going to a publisher and saying, "Hey, I'll sell you my publishing, I'll keep my copyrights," that means they get half the money,
Right.
okay, for an advance. So what happens was, Bug Music said, "Let's start a publishing company, and we won't take anyone's publishing, but we'll administrate for 15%. They're attorneys." Awesome. So we took on all the songwriters. What I was hired to do was to hire songwriters. That's my thing, is placing music with major artists, and I did that for a decade, and that was my thing. It turned
Like
into
in TV and in film and
yeah, and I can in film, television, any artist. I just find out who's recording a new album. Company send me down, Phil, bring what your songs down. But oh yeah, these will be great. These will be. Then I play some. That's for kids, and play some music. So I went from being a studio musician to seeing that studio musician thing was ending really quick, and it was ending about 1978, 79, where there's no more. We're going to get replaced with machines. So I thought, okay, I'm a computer nerd. I built my own computer when I was 13. I can do this. I got into computers. I got into CD.
You went to work for Disney.
Yeah, I was often theme parties. That was my thing. And so then with the technology, I ended up in all the studios. Because I'm a recording engineer. It's Island, Bug Music, Capitol Records, Island Records, Island Music, Bug Music. I've worked at Landmark Entertainment. I've built theme parks all over the world. I have digital cinemas that I built for the Olympics. I designed the new digital cinemas to come out, and those are mine. And I did a lot of it.
in McMinnville?
No, only 3 years ago, I retired and came here. My buddy here. We're Santa Barbara boys.
Sadly, this conversation occurred on St. Patrick's Day of this year after Melanie was already gone. At that point, I put together a comprehensive binder of all the information I had gathered over the years. I supplied this to Dick Peterson, who, in addition to being a member of the Kingsmen band, is also famous for having won a rights issue against major corporations over the use of the band's recording of Louie Louie. In the hopes of finding answers, I also had researched Quartet Music. That was the company directly assigned by Peter, or so the paperwork from ASCAP said. I discovered that Quartet Music was a royalty and payment collection company as well for artists in music. Quartet Music rounded up payments on the artist's behalf. They paid the artists after taking a small, almost minuscule fee for themselves. In summary, there was no real reason Melanie wasn't given the respect to be listened to on her requests to receive all of her payments. This is why I seriously feel the need for advanced legal work in music today. By this, I mean we should now have laws in place that allow artists in music to know all of the details and all the ins and outs when it comes to contracts being operated on and the sales at all year by year of their artistic products.
Why sleep, I heard, and I followed it today to the top of the hill where the wind songs play. Perfect. And I sing it like I heard it. Why I heard it, who knows why. Why sleep when we can watch the sun arise? When we can watch the sun arise.